Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Blue Knight 7, and welcome to the Blue Knight Cast. Reaching sort of an anniversary with our fifth episode, episode 5. And today, what I want to do is kind of look forward with Switch 1 and see exactly what to expect. This is sort of the second uh, episode in an informal series here, you could say, I'm putting together, where last time I talked about looking back on the past 8 years with Switch 1, which I did, and in the end I talked about how we'd be going forward now. Looking forward to what to expect out of Nintendo and Switch 2 for the year. But before we do that, I wanted to hit the brakes a second and talk about Switch 1. What should we expect going forward? And this will probably be a little shorter than the first episode because I don't have as much to say. And I'll probably just do a double release with this because I know everybody just wants to talk about Switch 2 at this point. But before we do that, I just want to discuss what we should probably expect out of Switch 1 for 2025, maybe 2026. Who knows after that? But I do think it's fair to maybe talk about it because, let's be honest, the Switch has basically kept going for 8 years straight on a pretty solid release schedule, especially from a first party perspective. But third party has been pretty solid all throughout. It kind of accelerated and now it's dwindling down, but it's still pretty solid. And I just wanted to take a minute to discuss what could happen with Switch 1 in the immediate future. Talk about maybe best case scenario, worst case scenario for someone who's still hanging on to their Switch 1 or who may have bought a Switch 1 during the holidays last year or maybe just generally bought one recently. Because I get it, if you bought it, you kind of want to get some life out of it. And I think you're going to get some life out of it. But no reason why you shouldn't. But let's start with what I think could be the worst case scenario, which is basically Switch 1 game releases support falls off a cliff. And I know there's a lot of people expecting this because why not? The platform is 8 years old. Switch 2 is coming out. There's going to be a lot of third party devs who really just wanted that Switch 2. Because here's the thing. Did they make some games work on Switch 1? Yes, they did. Did they want to work on Switch 1? And I'm just kind of going on collected, just watching content on the internet, hearing things publicly said by developers. It's something where you could make a game for it, but there were limits. And with today's games, you hit a limit sometimes, especially if you're in the AAA space. And the main bottleneck supposedly the Switch 1 has probably is the amount of RAM it carries. Which, if the specs that have been leaked, discussed about are right, shouldn't be as big a deal. I believe it's supposed to have 12 gigabytes of RAM. Some of that will go to the operating system, of course, but 12 is better than 4. So that should lift a major bottleneck. Pair that with the much faster T239 chip and whatever NVIDIA is implementing for DLSS should be a major difference for developers, like night and day if you're trying to make something more like a high AA or a AAA game. But that's not what we're really talking about today, so I digress. The point is, Switch One is is a platform you can develop a game for, and can still develop a game for in 2025. But you're doing it with 2015 tech, more or less, and there's limits, and that's what has kept a lot of third-party games off of Switch. That's why a lot of the ports that do come are called impossible ports, because a lot of people honestly did not think you could get a game like Witcher 3, Doom 2016, Doom Eternal, even Outer Worlds. There's just a lot of games that nobody thought could actually operate on Switch's hardware, but they were able to optimize and dumb down the graphics to the point that they can. Sacrifices were made. Do you play Doom in 30 FPS? You know, motion blur. I mean, there's sacrifices that were made, but it could be done. Switch 2 should take care of that. Now, what should we expect for Switch 1? Just speaking strictly for 2025, I think you kind of need to look at what's been done so far. What we know. If you look, I'll go a step further than that. If you look back over 2024, going into 25, where we are now, they did slow down their first party releases, or turn the temperature down, I would say, because they released games, but they weren't earth-shattering headliner games. Looking back over 2024, I would argue that Mario Party was probably their biggest release. Mario and Luigi, yes, it's a Mario game, but it's kind of like a beginner's RPG. That wasn't destined to do amazing sales. Echoes of Wisdom, Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, that was probably their next biggest game behind Mario RPG, but I mean, nobody was hailing it as the next Breath of the Wild, let's be honest. Earlier in the year, I think more of games like Endless Ocean or Princess Peach Showtime, not criticizing them as games, it's just these weren't the higher budget flagship like game releases. These weren't the big bombs. Did they keep things going? Yes. But, you know, round that out with others like Emio, the Smiling Man, the Famicom Detective Club game, the NES Championships game. I'm not criticizing these games. They were actually critically good entries. It's just they're not a Breath of the Wild or a Metroid Prime 4 or a Super Mario Odyssey or a Mario Kart 9 like we're expecting for Switch 2. And that's kind of what I'm getting at here. Now, for 2025 so far, we had the much marketed Donkey Kong Country Returns remake. And I'll be honest, it was kind of hilarious to watch Nintendo keep tweeting about this remake when everybody just wanted the Switch 2 teaser. But they really marketed that game. Now we're seeing, I would argue, even thicker marketing for Xenoblade Chronicles X, that remake, which is good. But so far for 2025, and nothing for February, by the way. That was the most curious thing to me. February was just empty. That's not normal for Switch era. You could argue that Switch era was just not normal, because we didn't have major gaps in releases. But to go through a February in the Nintendo Switch era without any kind of release, shadow drop, something, that was not normal. I actually thought we were getting a February, like a surprise February Direct, even though Nintendo announced the April Direct in January. I actually thought we were getting something in February just because I thought it was odd to not have anything in February. We had a Pokemon Presents, okay, sure, but there was no game releases in February in the Switch era. Think about that. That was kind of a big deal to me. I was hoping they'd shadow drop like Metroid Prime 2 and 3 remakes or something. They didn't do that. But when you look at what they have announced for Switch 1 this year, we got 3 games. We already got the Donkey Kong Country Returns remake. We are about to get Xenoblade Chronicles X and Metroid Prime 4. Just talking first party from Nintendo, that's it for Switch 1. We are still running, and with Metroid Prime 4, I'll just say it, we're running on the understanding that it's a Switch 1 game. I'm sure there is a Switch 1 version of the game. That's what they've been developing all this time. I'm sure if you have a Switch 1 and you're just worried about whether a new game is still coming, yes, you got Xenoblade X and you got Metroid Prime 4. We don't know Metroid Prime 4's release date. I'll get to that in a moment. But that's what we got. Now, what should we expect then? It's hard. I guess you could tell so far it's been hard for me to not talk about Switch 2 as I talk about Switch 1, because that's really what this year's about. But my prediction is Metroid Prime 4 is going to be either in the launch lineup for Switch 2, or it'll be released, say, a month after Switch 2. If hypothetically Switch 2 is released in May, we see Metroid Prime 4 in June. That's what I think will happen. Or it'll be released in May along with Mario Kart 9. Now, but that's Switch 2, you say. I agree. I think Metroid Prime 4 is going to get some kind of special cross-gen treatment that other games may not get. Just because of its long development cycle, the investment made in it, what it is. I'm expecting it to release on one of those times I just said. I really hope they don't save it for the holiday. I just don't think it needs that. But I think it needs closer to launch timing myself for attention and marketing purposes. They may see it differently where they put it out later and try to focus marketing on it. Maybe that'll work. I don't know. But I'm seeing something where when they release it, there will be a Switch 1 version and Switch 1 packaging for Switch 1 only. Or, it's made for Switch 1. And there will be a Switch 2 exclusive version, Switch 2 cartridge, Switch 2 graphics enhancements to justify it. Maybe mouse control with the new Joy-Cons. I think there is something like that in the works. Retro has had plenty of time at this point to both make the game, polish the game, add Switch 2 enhancements, make sure those are polished. I believe they've had the time to do all this, and that's what they did. There's also rumors they're already working on Metroid Prime 5, by the way. Like 4 is just put a fork in it and it's done. So, I just think they may have done some prep work for 5 by adding enhancements to 4. That's my theory. We'll find out what happens. we're all kind of wondering how back compatibility with Switch 2, like how deep it is anyway. But I think Metroid Prime 4 is going to be a special case. Not all games, most games will not operate this way. But I think there will be like a Switch 1 and a Switch 2 version for that game. Now, that I said that, the worst case scenario in my mind, to go back to what I was starting on earlier, is that we get to Switch 2 launch window, Metroid Prime 4. That's going to be their swan song. I do believe that, no matter what. That's probably going to be the last new big project for Switch 1, and then support falls off a cliff. And if you have a Switch 1, well, you got an eShop with the whole catalog. Play the games you want. That's the worst, that's the worst case scenario. It's not a horrible scenario because you got a lot of games you can play. But that to me would be the worst. Third parties just drop it, go on. Now, even in the worst case scenario, though, I'll give you another prediction I strongly believe. I don't think anybody would challenge me. Indie games continue to come out for Switch 1 that are also compatible with Switch 2. And they'll be on the eShop like they always were. And limited run games will keep publishing Switch 1 editions of a lot of those games. I believe that will happen. If you want to know what physical Switch 1 games going forward looks like, I will go to limited run games and those small batch companies. They will probably keep churning them out. They might be able to do a quicker turnaround if major third parties are not printing Switch 1 cards. I don't know. But I think that will be something that happens no matter what. Indie games, some are more technically demanding, but most, I would argue, probably aren't and still work well within Switch 1 parameters. Will there be some indies that you only play on Switch 2? I'm sure there will be. I'm just saying they're probably not going to be in as great a number as you may think. Animal Well, to me, doesn't necessarily need a Switch 2. Shovel Knight games, to me, they don't necessarily need a Switch 2. If there was something that was really using 4K, sure. But I don't think that's going to be a major thing for Switch 1 and Switch 2. I think you're going to see a lot of indie games on Switch 1 regardless that keep getting put into the eShop. So that's the good news. As long as you like indie games, which I do. That's the good news. Now, if you would like a best case scenario, it would be, Nintendo ends up announcing a couple more games. If you can tell, I'm managing expectations here. A couple. Nintendo's president Furukawa said they would consider making new titles if it made sense for Switch 1. I'm not sure what makes sense meant to him. To me, it meant they wasn't really planning to, but if somehow Switch 1 keeps selling, maybe they would do something. That's kind of how I took it. But is it possible that there's some other cross-gen Switch games in the works in the same way I'm talking about Metroid Prime 4? It could be. There could be something. I just don't think there are higher budget titles or priorities. I do think whenever we get the next generation of Pokemon, they're going to be Switch 1. if you want something we haven't announced yet, I'll predict Pokemon will stay on Switch 1 for the next gen. That's because they, of all of Nintendo's related studios, related companies, Pokemon is very much about getting the most sales they possibly can and getting on the largest install base they possibly can. They stayed on 3DS for a bit after Switch launched. Sword and Shield was a 2019 release. We went 2 years without a major Pokemon game. I believe Pokemon will come to Switch 2, but it isn't coming this gen. It'll be a couple years from now, or however it's scheduled. So I expect the next gen to be Switch 1. And I forgot to mention Pokemon Legends ZA. That's still a Switch 1 game as well. I think it'll come later in the year. I think it might be a holiday window game. So we know it's 2025. So I would expect Pokemon Legends ZA to come, next gen Pokemon game to come regardless as well, even in the worst case scenario. But with Switch 1, I don't expect a whole lot beyond that, but in the best case, yeah, there's some smaller budget projects like we've seen in 2024 and this year. Xenoblade X is probably a bigger budget than I realized, but it's still a remake. I think we could still see some remakes styled for Switch 1 in 2025, going into 26 to some point. As far as rumors, there's also from Nate the Hate, who I do trust as a leaker. I mean, generally speaking, if none of them are perfect, I think people obsess way too much about their track records and accuracy. They're just leakers, repeating what they've heard. That's the way I see that. Take it with a grain of salt, people. But generally speaking, when Nate the Hate says something, he doesn't miss or miss by much, and even if he's wrong, it generally comes true a year later or something. But he did say we're getting Kirby Planet Robobot as a Switch 1 game, which would be a remake of a 3DS game. And that's kind of more what I'm talking about when I say not the big releases. We may get some more 3DS era remakes, maybe some GameCube, Wii remakes. I think something like that is on the table. Like maybe we get a few more of those. I believe it's Jason Schreier leaking that there's some efforts to court third parties to get some older third party games on Switch as well. More like older ones like Smuggler's Run, some Ubisoft games. It's possible. There's already talk of Ubisoft wanting to dump a bunch of games on Switch 2. You could see some Switch 1s in the mix. Why not? If the games are old enough, They were pretty good about trying to get the older Assassin's Creed games on Switch. So, to me, that's not ridiculous assumption. We could get some older games if they fit on Switch 1 specs come to Switch 1. That's all I'm trying to say. I think there could be a slew of them. Now, if Nintendo wants to keep looking back on older systems for remakes for Switch 1, which I don't object to, by the way, Kirby Planet Robobot is a good one. I would want to see the Metroid Prime 2 remake. Or not Prime 2, but the Metroid 2 remake. Samus Returns find its way to Switch 1. That was a game that it was one of the last games to come out for 3DS after Switch launched. And I remember at the time thinking, dang it, I wish they'd just moved it on to Switch. And, I have the game. I have it on 3DS. I played it on 3DS. But I would play it again if they would just make a Switch 2 a Switch 1, Switch 2 version. Preferably Switch 1. Just keep, they don't have to completely overhaul 3DS graphics. Just make it playable on Switch 1. Price it accordingly. I think it would do well. Especially if you follow it a little bit after Metroid Prime 4. I just think it would do well. Bouncing off of that, other games I'd like to see remade. If they're not going to make a Wave Race, maybe put Blue Storm on Switch 1. The GameCube had amazing water effects. I'm sure they'd carry over. Super Mario Galaxy 2. Everybody complained about that not getting the Mario All-Stars collection. Just bring it over. Some people say it's the best 3D Mario ever. Just put that over. We also, and this has been rumored and talked about for years, there's actually about 5 games that's been rumored and talked about for years. But I'll start with a Fire Emblem remake of Genealogy of the Holy War. Nate the Hate has consistently said it's coming. And I think that could be in the wings for just a Switch 1 version release. If they just updated graphics, remade the game, I don't see why that couldn't run as a Switch 1 game. And, Fire Emblem's never been known as a graphical powerhouse. And especially with the older games, they were just basically 2D games. And tactical RPG, but 2D graphics. And my point is, I don't see why in the world that couldn't run as a Switch 1 game, even if it's released during the Switch 2 era. Bouncing back to Metroid, it's been talked about for years that there would be a Metroid Prime 2 and Metroid Prime 3 remake. Maybe not as enhanced as the Metroid Prime remake we did get, but just to release them before 4. And it'd be consistent with Nintendo's pattern of releasing a lot of the older games in a series before the new one comes out on Switch. It's not unheard of. It's been kind of expected by me. I thought that might be what we're getting this February, but we didn't get it. So I still think that's on the cards. I wonder, I would think they would release them before Prime 4 if they were going to do it, but we haven't seen it yet. We don't know Prime 4's actual release date. We really don't. We just know 2025. I don't know that it's a launch game for Switch 2. So I think that's still like an open question and very much in play. Also, for years, there's been talk of the HD remake versions of Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, Legend of Zelda Wind Waker, Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, being released as Switch 1 games, with some debate over whether they'd be separate games or as a double pack entry. Same for the Metroid Prime games. But my take on that would be, sure, it could happen. Sure, those could be part of a launch window for Switch 2. I think they would put those later. I think they would be separate games instead of a 2-pack. I think Nintendo would be confident they could still charge like $50 for one or $60 for one, just because those games are beloved, especially Wind Waker now. You wouldn't believe how hated that game was at the time it was released, though. That's the biggest people appreciate it later type story you can have on a video game, I believe. But I believe you could have one in the launch window just to get it out, and maybe one for the holiday. Or you could release them both. I think they would want to separate them, though. They certainly had them separate as they were first released in HD. Prime 2 and 3, I think they'd release them both at once at this point just to get them out before Prime 4. But we'll see. But I think those are 5 I just listed off between Kirby, Fire Emblem, 2 Metroid Primes, 2 Zelda remakes. There's just 6 games going from GameCube, well, Super NES for Fire Emblem, to GameCube for the Zelda games, Metroid Prime 2, to Wii for Metroid Prime 3, and 3DS for Kirby Planet Robobot. There's you a good spread of remakes that they could throw on the table after this month. And how much more are they doing? We'll see. If there's a Kid Icarus Uprising remake, I know there's a lot of people that want it. You could throw that in this list too. I think there's some reason to believe there might be one in the works. Namco has stepped up its production for Switch 2 development. They got good connections with Masahiro Sakurai. Sakurai is working on a Switch 2 game. It's pretty clear, I think, from what he's hinted at in his video series. It could be Smash Brothers. It could just be that. But I wouldn't be surprised if Kid Icarus got some work somehow as a remake. And I think all of those things are options. Do we get all of that? I don't know. But just like that, I've listed off 7 remakes that could come out, let's say, over 6 months for Switch 1. I see no reason why they wouldn't be a Switch 1 version. So there you go. And do I think it's just month after month after month? It could be, just to keep Switch momentum going as Switch 2 gets its stride. I don't know. I think we have a lot to find out about whether Switch 2 is going to keep its one release a month cadence that Nintendo have with Switch 1. I don't think that's guaranteed. We'll see. But these could be used to plug the gaps, or could just be released alongside Switch 2. We'll see how they do. We'll see how confident Nintendo is on that, or how their development pipeline's going now. I do think their major studios all had to kind of bunker down and get a Switch 2 game ready for the last couple of years. So we'll see what that's yielded. But for now, I would say if you recently bought a Switch 1, don't worry. I wouldn't buy a Switch 1 now, but if you did buy one recently, don't worry. I think you're going to have a few months of new games, but regardless, even if it's the worst case scenario where everything I just said ends up being Switch 2 stuff, or it doesn't come, you got an amazing backlog of games already on the eShop. Don't tell me you've played all the good ones yet. I know better. Go through there. Find some stuff you want to play. And if you do buy Switch 2 when it comes out, you're going to have those old games to play through anyway. So just play them now. Enjoy them. The best is yet to come, especially with Nintendo. Thank you all. I hope you enjoyed this today. I hope I gave some positivity out of this, because I do think the best is yet to come for Nintendo. And everyone have a good day. Thank you for listening to me. I'm really enjoying doing the last couple of episodes here. I am going to try to keep going and do this regular. Please like, subscribe. I am trying to grow subscribers. You could say my next goal is to reach the 1,000 subscribers and reach monetization. I have a long way to go, and I know it. But if you could listen to this, set this for alerts, continuous support, it would mean so much to me. And please feel free to comment with anything you would like to hear me talk about. I will consider it. Thank you very much. Have a good day.